Hi everyone, Kieran here of Proteus Astrology. This is another astro-biography where astrology is used almost in a forensic manner as evidence for what is speculated. This time it's going deep into Florence Farr as I'm going to an event to celebrate her work and some of the background of the Golden Dawn. Just to say, it's no sound bite, I'm afraid. There's quite a bit of research here, especially into the asteroids. So do take time to absorb that as it's fascinating. I've not seen asteroids covered before exactly in this way, so that's unique. But there's also a bit of astrolocation too for those interested. It is divided up into 5 sections to make it easier to jump around as needed. And there's a written version on my website if you prefer that at proteusastrology.co.uk under articles. I relied quite heavily on Mary K. Greer's book Women of the Golden Dawn, but there are numerous other sources and the hyperlinks are all there in the written version. So the areas of her life to be covered are Florence Farr and the Magical Imagination, 2 Farr as Bohemian Muse of the Era, 3 Mistress of the Isis-Urania Temple, 4 the 4 asteroid archetypes of the Golden Dawn, and 5 Farr's personal asteroids, Florence, Vesta, Urania, Polyhymnia, and Isis, and then the final years in Ceylon. So here we go. I hope you enjoy it. On July 8th, 2023, Florence Farr is centre stage, and one of her little-known Egyptian plays will be recited in London once again, The Shrine of the Golden Hawk. This happens on her Neptune return. As a chart lives on after death, the wheels are forever turning. It somehow affects us all, I think, as Neptune is at the same place at the end of Pisces, where it was when she was born back in 1860. Only this time it is square to the galactic center until 2025. It could help us to tune in even better to what Florence Farr was about, to understand her message, how movements in the invisible mold what happens in the visible world. The nodes and nodal returns tend to be significant when the native comes back into prominence for any reason. Currently, Farr's progressed sun is close to the galactic center, shining a light from beyond this galaxy on her solar return celebration of July 2023. But what's very interesting is that this also happens to be the point of her lot of spirit, her guardian angel. It's at this same point of 27 degrees of Sagittarius, and the moon is conjunct Chiron in Aquarius by progression. Her actual centenary, though, would have been in 1960 and the commemoration of her death in 2017. Yet she's been celebrated as new books are published about her work. She could even claim to be the first of the so-called Bromley contingent, but just a century ahead of her time. We'll get to that mysterious link to Susie Sue later on. Florence Farr's sun was in Cancer, so she was highly intuitive and artistic, inspirational to others, but she was also a Leo ascendant with a stellium of planets in Leo, so she shone on the London stage in theatrical productions. There's a moon-sun dynamic here of emotion and passion, creating a lot of impact. She was certainly noticed and hugely admired in her time in London's West End. She had Venus opposite Mars and a moon and Neptune stacked like bookends, the Alpha and Omega at the starting and end point of Pisces. She was born in Bromley in 1860, yet died far away in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, and what drove her there was an interest in theosophy. I will mention her asteroid placements, as those shine a light on the lesser-known facets of her life. They especially shine for a woman who appeared to embody very specific mythological energies. Why was there all this interest in Egyptian magic, we may ask? This is where the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn's influence with its Masonic overtones is paramount. What captures the essence of the Golden Dawn's gift to the tradition is where she stated in 1893, much more succinctly than Blavatsky ever could, that the first principles of Egyptian magic were based on an elaborate system of correspondences, depending on the formula that the evolution of what is material follows the type and symbol of the emanation of the spiritual, that spirit and matter are opposite faces of the self-same mystery. She wrote plays to be performed with this ritual and initiatory element woven into them. Her most honed tool for these events would have been her resonant voice, an octave above her natural voice tone, which she perfected through intense concentration and her deep study of the mysteries. A sun in the 12th house often confers psychic gifts and an inexplicable allure, so it's not surprising to me that Farr inspired people around her. But it's not given to most people to be a muse, let alone a good one, or to play off two of the leading writers of the day. There are qualities you must have: the ability to inspire others, to be enigmatic, to be a lover, yet also to be elusive about the type of love it is, leaving the besotted one completely unrequited, appearing and disappearing as you please with a certain cat-like independence. A muse, whether male or female, has an element of the tease. They are idealized beauties who can also inflict pain and ruin, as with the Shea lore from Ireland. Consider what pain Bosie, a male muse, or Shea, inflicted on Oscar Wilde. To be muse to one artist is accolade enough, but Florence Farr was known to visibly and personally inspire not only playwright George Bernard Shaw, but poet W.B. Yeats as well. Later on, this allure even included inspiring the poet Ezra Pound. She took that adulation in her stride and still pursued her own interests and floated on regardless. But added to that was her luminous look, which was captured most elegantly by Edward Burne-Jones for his painting The Golden Stairs in 1876. She was the artist's model for Burne-Jones, along with Jane Morris, wife of William Morris, when she was only 19. Her sun was directly on his north node, and her Mars was on his Neptune. You could say that she was depicted as a waif-like, ethereal creature here, with an eternally youthful look and an appearance that was the arts crafts look, which must have been emulated by others, generating Florence Farr clones. Yeats had an on-off relationship with her. His Eros-Psyche conjunction in Taurus was on her natal Pluto. But he was notoriously also obsessed with Maud Gonne, his other muse, even though she spurned him numerous times and he was unable to marry her. Gonne also had psychic ability and flirted with magic. She also belonged to the Golden Dawn. It was a whole other phenomenon in herself, quite different to Farr. Yet it is Yeats's relationship to Florence Farr that has a special place in his work. He was very partial to her, as she was the one who could truly embody his poetry in the style he wished it to be heard. That is, musically intoned as if in a sacred rite, with the strange tones of the psaltery instrument as a backdrop. It's also interesting that Yeats, after putting it off for years, made the decision to get married soon after Florence Farr died, perhaps finally released from her spell. With Venus in Leo opposite Mars, out of sign, in Capricorn, in Farr's natal chart, it must have kept her admirers in a merry old round dance, with some friction and guesswork needed as to what she really thought. She could be showy, yet she had a firm edge, to go her own way. She was the first to say to George Bernard Shaw to kiss and to get that bit over with after all the niceties and prevarication. So she had no problem taking the lead in male-female relations in the social sphere, and that was ahead of her time. Her Venus rules her 4th house of home and family, but Mars rules her 10th of reputation, allowing her to be the first and others second. But the 10th is also softened by rulership of Venus, making a career in the arts and theatre almost inevitable. The men around her would be enraptured and intrigued and then given the cold shoulder. To be baffling to others is the Muse's lot in life. It is what keeps others' interests high and boredom low. It was said that she had difficulty saying no to advances from men, but this was a rumour to imply she was a loose woman. There's little evidence of more than 3 men in her life, despite what the gossips said. Shaw, who eventually became that most hybrid of creatures, an irascible millionaire communist, and who subjected her to relentless criticism as would a dentist strapping his victim to a chair, was the one who started the rumour. He first depicted her as loose, and he complained her acting was feeble. Yet Shaw was a self-declared fluent liar, and was well known for leading on the leading ladies of the era, Ellen Terry and Mrs. Patrick Campbell among them. He would let them think his interest was amorous, and then he would suddenly declare it platonic, leaving them baffled. Farr's first man was her husband, Edward Emery. He was a gambler, and he became a huge disappointment to her, so she was not inclined to make any further mistake or lose her newly gained independence after her separation from Emery. Then came Shaw and Yeats, who both truly admired her skills as much as the way she looked, though Shaw was more critical of her acting. Finally, in 1894, she divorced Emery. With the 2 Irish bards, at least, there was some intellectual frisson that maintained their mutual interest to the end. Both Shaw, a Leo, and Yeats, a Gemini, have one thing in common, which may explain this being in love with love effect: the obsessional dalliances that tormented them, strong Eros placements. Shaw's Eros was in Taurus, conjunct Pluto, and opposite Mars, so that he was highly sexed and quite likely power-hungry in relationships. And for Yeats, he had an actual Eros-Psyche conjunction, also in earthy Taurus. Eros placed in Taurus is most connected to epithemia, the truly sensual side of love, or simply being horny. Yet this marks the in love with love feeling too. Yeats said that Farr had a poetic gift and a Demeter-like face that was contra-realistic, so Ibsen's realistic plays did not suit her so much as his own lyrically intoned mystical plays. Farr herself had asteroid Eros in Cancer, 7 degrees away from her sun, so not within the 3 degrees orb required for an asteroid to be truly significant. Nevertheless, it is co-present in the sign that houses her sun. Her Venus is conjunct Jupiter, amplifying the spirit of being there at the right time and place to be noticed, that special kind of luck bestowed by Jupiter in a fire sign. Yet that Venus was also square to Pluto in Taurus, adding an intensity to the compulsions and perhaps unconsciously an ability to control her admirers and keep them hanging on for whatever reason. This could have evolved her ideas about power and how to wield it. To become an adept of power is to possess the key to the secrets of all nature, because you possess the key to your own nature. Farr, Yeats, and Shaw, all roughly of the same generation, born around the same time, had similar outer planet placements. Neptune was in late Pisces in their charts, as it is today. The 4 most famous asteroids, Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta, had all been discovered. They were even counted as planets until 1845. And I have noted elsewhere too that this was the 15-year highly fertile period from around 1850 to 1865, when most of the Muse asteroids were discovered. And Neptune stimulated many people at the time to become more spiritually creative. Spiritualism and table tapping became the vogue. So that these 3 would have a similar outlook is not remarkable. The planetary influences tend to do that for a whole generation. But clearly there was something attractive and alluring about Florence Farr that stood out from the rest, as she was named by her peers as the Bohemian's Bohemian. Her admirer George Bernard Shaw was in league with the Fabians, who were architects of today's social engineering schemes. He wanted to mold Farr into the so-called new woman that everyone talked about, and she did not always fit that particular mold. Also, W.B. Yeats, whose reputation was growing, was a member of the Golden Dawn, and it was from occult literature and the Hermetic tradition that he drew his profound control of metaphors. He saw her as the perfect expression of the mystical characters in his plays and for her use of her voice. So she was a kind of tuning fork by which others resonated. Cancer sun signs ruled by the moon can often have this instinctive magnetic pulling power, and her stellium in Leo made her the center stage personality that dramatized this concept of the new woman, able to hold her own among men as far as was permitted in that late Victorian era. But she had hidden depths, more than how she appeared. She often was searching for something more than the conditions of life then offered. Just to mention, if you are not interested in the Hermetic history, or if asteroids are not your thing, you could easily skip this part and jump to part 6 to catch up on the astro-biography only. This section and the next 2 sections are pretty much just fascinating digressions. What many do not realize was that Florence Farr was appointed head of the Golden Dawn in London, while the instigator of the order, MacGregor Mathers, and his wife Moyna attempted to control the London groups remotely from Paris. This may have made Farr not just the mistress of the Isis-Urania temple, as it was known, but also, behind the scenes, one of the most influential women of the era. It also created enemies. It's worth delving into the Golden Dawn history a little bit here, as it's fascinating in its own right, but it helps to explain what Florence Farr was really about. The correct designation was of the inner temple of Isis-Urania, and is probably, this is the least explained part of what they represented. But we can say that these two goddesses were emblematic of the energies that came through the Golden Dawn. And I've used their astrological placements to find out what astrology has to say about them. The influence of the Golden Dawn through the 20th century can't be underestimated, as when we talk of the Tarot and the Kabbalah, it's largely because of their work. The word Hermetic was used liberally to give sources a lineage that perhaps was not theirs. But that influence is still increasing. In fact, more books are being published. What's fascinating is to track the family tree of all the interrelated cluster groups at the time, the last decade of the 19th century, the signature aspect of which was that Pluto-Neptune in Gemini. These groups stretched across the worlds of politics, theatre, literature, the arts, the Masons, occult orders, spiritualists, and Bohemians, and miscellaneous oddball characters. Remember that the images of the tarot most popular today by Pixie Smith come directly from Golden Dawn symbolism. There were authors, Sax Rohmer, Algernon Blackwood, Arthur Machen, E. Nesbitt, and even Constance Wilde, who were, if not full members, at least associated with the Golden Dawn, but there was no evidence that Bram Stoker had joined. There was also Alan Bennett, the first accredited teacher of Buddhism in the UK. And then Arthur Edward Waite, William Wynne Westcott, Moyna Mathers, née Bergson, who was the sister of the philosopher Henri Bergson, Annie Horniman, the tea magnate, hence known as Hornybags, poet W.B. Yeats, and of course the enfant terrible, Aleister Crowley. The Golden Dawn cut across classes as well, but it was mostly a bunch of aristocrats dabbling in magic, while still being co-educational and quite innovative for its time. Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers identified with Bulwer Lytton's novel Zanoni, 1842, which revealed a secret order, a Rosicrucian brotherhood active in Europe. He himself acted like an eccentric character from Zanoni. Whether the source documents by Anna Sprengler were authentic or not, the occult world reached its peak and the Golden Dawn established its authority and elevated women to priest-like status for the first time. It was established on March the 1st, 1888, and strikingly named the Temple of Isis-Urania. Number 3. There was apparently no number 1 or number 2. It started at 3. The chart for that inauguration day has the Sun at 11 degrees of Pisces. This is square to the Pluto-Neptune conjunction across the cusp of Taurus and Gemini, opposite an expansive, higher knowledge-hungry Jupiter in Sagittarius, all boding well for an occult order of power and influence. But there's a fixed square of Saturn at 0 degrees in Leo and Mars at 0 degrees in Scorpio. That could spell out all the later divisions. There is a rectangle linking and locking in the energies of Pluto, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. Rectangles can confer wisdom, but also can keep the energy trapped and the cross accusations flying. The asteroids here cannot be overlooked, since the nature of the order was to restore an understanding of pagan goddesses and rituals. So what's amazing to me is this triple conjunction of the asteroid series at 0 degrees, Urania, Muse of astrology, at 1 degree, and asteroid Isis at 4 degrees, all in Taurus. Could this have been by design? That's very hard to confirm. Asteroid Ceres would put women in the picture, even with her dark side of grief and loss. And asteroid Isis there was the goddess most of the female Golden Dawn members identified with, especially Moyna Mathers and Florence Farr. And Urania points to their study of astrology. These three were opposite planet Mars and asteroid Sappho in early Scorpio, hinting at all the intense battles that led to the splintering of the order. That the Golden Dawn inspired a good deal of heavily spiritualized love poetry is indicated too by the conjunction of Mercury with both asteroid Eros and Muse asteroid Erato, around 11 degrees of Pisces. These were all close to the Sun in the chart, and that gives it a signature style that I think at its core is to do with sex and love, perhaps even sex magic. I note that Venus was in the forward-thinking sign of Aquarius, so they were definitely progressive in disseminating new ideas, though still during an era when it was not possible to talk openly and secrets filtered out mainly through metaphors and allusions. Mary K. Greer sought to restore interest and attention to the women in her 1996 book, Women of the Golden Dawn, Rebels and Priestesses. This was largely to acknowledge their contribution, which was often overlooked. She drew parallels from these women to the four major asteroids discovered in the early part of the 19th century: Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta. These female archetypes are not usually included in natal analysis, but they align with the four functions of the psyche as laid out by Jung: feeling, thinking, sensation, and intuition. Water, air, earth, and fire. Astrologers will recognize these as the four elements. Greer did not omit to mention the shadow side of each goddess, however, which is interesting as the dynamic then becomes more real and they are more complete. Often the more popular, shiny, and virtue signaling side of the archetype is favored, and that obscures the dark side, as archetypes have a tendency to do when they possess the mind through shadow projection. Now it's possible to add the asteroid placement planets, which I've done, in their charts, just to verify Greer's assessment. Moina Mathers' Juno is at 10 degrees of airy idealistic Aquarius, square to her south node and Pluto. Annie Horniman's Pallas is at 19 degrees of combative Aries, opposite her Sun and Mercury in Libra. But her Sun is conjunct asteroid Clio, which fits her personality very well as she was an ardent student and teacher who controlled all the records and archives at the Golden Dawn. Maud Gonne's Ceres is at 11 degrees of intense Scorpio in the third house, incidentally conjunct asteroid Walruka, the Valkyrie. That's a female creature that guides the souls of the dead to Odin's hall. And some said she looked like a Valkyrie as she was so statuesque. Farr's Vesta is at 24 degrees of intellectually curious Gemini, giving it an adaptable, quick-minded flavor. Vesta, the asteroid itself, was discovered by Heinrich Olbers in 1807. Vesta represents our ability to hold the sacred flame of votive energy and to sublimate that within the body, and so it matches the personality of Florence Farr very well. Asteroid Vesta was designated as number 4. But other female characters in the Golden Dawn also deserve mention. The woman, the actress Ellen Terry, called Pixie, could be said to have a greater legacy. This was Pamela Coleman Smith, who designed the artwork for the Rider-Waite-Smith deck of tarot cards. And she had many other talents as well, but she came a little bit later. Also, William Horton, painter and illustrator, who not much is known about, but he was favored by W.B. Yeats. However, Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, was also a member of the Golden Dawn. But things did not go well for the Golden Dawn. It started with huge potential and then crashed horribly. They did not successfully knit together as a group of people under Mathers' leadership. So there were several conflicts that disintegrated the core members into splinter groups. The most infamous clash was that of the so-called Battle of Blythe Road, where Yeats allegedly threw Crowley out of the building. But Crowley, ever divisive, decked out in Highland dress and black mask, had made his point. The Dawn splintered thereafter. Florence took the motto Sapientia, Sapienti Donodata. Wisdom is given as a gift to the wise for her initiation. Some might say that she represented the best of the Golden Dawn, as she was kind, noble, authentic, talented, and alluring, interested in fighting for women's rights and for workplace equality and being true to yourself. But she also sided with Yeats against Crowley in that fight on Blythe Road, enabling herself to be appointed leader, but Yeats later sided against her on a fight against Horniman for the control of the Golden Dawn. Farr was a poet herself and wrote many articles and books, gaining her knowledge from her long studies at the British Library and the British Museum. While they were not well known in her lifetime, she had ideas over 100 years ago that sound relevant today. In Our Evil Stars, 1907, she wrote, "We must kill the force in us that says we cannot become all we desire, for that force is our evil star that turns all opportunity into grotesque failure. So let us each recognize the truth that our first business is to change ourselves and then we can change our circumstances. There are other comments scattered among her writings that have a similar modern feel to them. In asteroid astrology, there are personal name asteroids such as Kevin, Mary, and even Pekka, which give a wealth of personalized detail to the chart, and often the asteroid is closely placed to people in the life of that native. I understand the idea that those pesky little asteroids just bring clutter to the universe, as they are in their thousands, and that there's a beauty and symmetry to sticking only to the traditional planets. I agree with that, but I can't help feeling also that we're ready for more, and that's why they keep on popping up to describe facets of someone better and in a more personal way. And there are asteroids of place and of things that provide a backdrop to a person's life and their travels, their interests. We might look for the asteroid T in the chart of Annie Horniman, for example, which is square to her sun. Her family were tea magnates, and all the money she donated to the Golden Dawn and to the Abbey Theatre came from tea. But occasionally you come across a startling synchronicity. The asteroid Florence, which has the number 3211, is neatly conjunct Florence Farr's sun. The personal name asteroid Florence is at 17 degrees of Cancer, and the sun is at 15 degrees of Cancer. That's amazing enough, perhaps a kind of quantum entanglement, aligning the heavens with her name for that particular incarnation. Her parents consciously chose the name of Florence to venerate Florence Nightingale. Nightingale, the nurse administrator, herself was named Florence because she was born in Florence, Italy. The asteroid Florence for Florence Nightingale was at 1 degree of Gemini, just 7 degrees from her moon and sun in Taurus. The asteroid Florence 3211 was on Yeats's descendant in his personal chart, marking the area where he was interested in others. But also, curiously, the asteroid Florence is on MacGregor Mathers's sun. He aligned himself totally with Moina in a sexless marriage of high chastity, but he actually relied on Florence to be the leader of the Golden Dawn while he lived in Paris. Farr may not have been perfect and was not successful at everything. Horniman found her executive abilities lacking, for example, and that was a bone of contention between them. But Florence Farr was most perfectly herself. So my suggestion is that when a personal name asteroid conjuncts your sun, you have no trouble becoming you, when others may struggle with the whole process of individuation. So there's an authenticity, a realness, a naturalness about that person. Vesta is the sacred flame and associated with Virgo intacta, where the meaning is less about sex than self-containment. Even her symbol represents flames, but this is also the spiritual fire. Otherwise, she is known as the goddess Hestia, the home or hearth, the fireplace, the core of safety and warmth within, and what keeps the fires burning. Farr's asteroid Vesta is at 24 degrees of Gemini, as we said, in the 11th house, conjunct asteroid Terpsichore, the muse of dance, and that points to her integration of artistic, theatrical, and ritual magic techniques. Her motivation to speak out in favor of prostitutes put her at the forefront of this controversial territory about the rights of women over their bodies, and that was daring to do so in her time, as society's attitudes towards the uses and abuses of sex are so easily polarized and misrepresented. Vesta is sextile to Saturn in Leo, giving it a lot of strength. It is also trine to Chiron at 27 degrees of Aquarius, as well as square to Neptune at the final degree of Pisces, tipping it towards passion for the ultimate ending. This is where it also conjuncts dwarf planet Sedna, which, according to Alan Clay, oscillates between victimization and transcendence. but takes anything it can find to propel it along the spiritual path. Vesta makes sacred the acts that many deem as bodily, and the body has a bad rap in the culture which deems it as dirty or immoral somehow. Farr attempted to restore the idea of the mind-body connection and to judge the body much less than her contemporaries did. She supported the rights of prostitutes, whom she called daughters of joy, which is interesting as even today this is controversial. The symbology of Vesta is also related to a supportive network of sisterhood of nuns and virgins, but symbolically it represents purity of any kind of the mind and the soul. There is a chastity and a discernment involved in the right to deny sex as well as to offer it. It may have been Vesta that fired her up to consider the rights of sex workers so ahead of her time. In an article called Asteroids in 1907, Farr wrote that ancient Egyptians, ancient Hindus agreed that the vagaries of nature must be obeyed, and certain women trained as dancers were dedicated to the gods and their worshippers. In their temples, prostitution was a sacred institution. The Vestal virgins were of this type. She agreed also that the Hindu, for instance, considers that woman is part of the immortal mother of life herself, and to unite with a woman is to clasp the universe in your arms and taste the ecstasy of being. This flame could also relate to Kundalini, the rising creative energy curled at the base of the spine, which is also associated with Uranus and midlife awakenings. With Vesta, the image that comes to mind to me is of a torch held up against all the odds, still singing while all around are dropping. It is enshrined in the glyph of Vesta, that of a burning flame. She could therefore be the mascot of torch singers who put their passion and pain into their voice. Urania is the muse of astrology and astronomy, so for this asteroid to be prominent in the Golden Dawn natal chart fits very well as they taught all their students astrology. To locate this asteroid in any of the charts of members of the Golden Dawn would also point to a particular love or alignment with astrology and or having a scientific mindset, at least for empirical research into natural cycles in the cosmos. Urania is the muse also of science and measurement and philosophy, so she is often portrayed holding a compass over a globe. Other indicators of a strong interest in astrology would be a prominent Uranus or the midpoint between Mercury and Uranus, especially if that hits any of the other significant planets or points in the chart. Astrology, along with Hermetic wisdom and the Kabbalah and the Tarot, was the bedrock of all the studies at the Golden Dawn. Farr clearly used astrology for all her workings, rituals, and choices as an adjunct tool to her intuition. She even taught classes on the subject along with ritual magic and Egyptology. While asteroid Urania is not conjunct to any major planet in her chart, it is placed at 24 degrees of the sign of Virgo, where painstaking and meticulous research is a definite strength. And her asteroid Urania is trine to Mars in Capricorn to underscore the organizational power. It is opposite that fated Neptune at the end of Pisces, so it had its influence in her life in curious ways. The signature conjunction of the 1890s was the Pluto-Neptune in Gemini, which was fairly close for several years. Let's call it the Mauve conjunction, as it signaled the unveiling of the shadow side, knowledge of the unconscious and disturbing areas of psychic life. The novels written at the time revealed this, of which Picture of Dorian Gray in 1991 was but the most well-known. By October 31st, 1991, the emergent energy was at its most intense because it was square to Jupiter in Pisces. But it was also conjunct asteroid Urania, so Urania helped configure this trend, not just as a significator of the power of the unconscious forces, but also of this reawakened interest in hidden lore of the stars and knowledge of how the universe unfolds. William Wynne Westcott, one of the founders of the Golden Dawn, had asteroid Urania conjunct his north node in Virgo, and he wrote a book on the history of astrology. But it is the other personality of the era, Pamela Combs Smith, who has her asteroid Urania conjunct Uranus itself in Leo. That's a standout conjunction for someone who created the most popular tarot deck, still the most widely used today, and which is ridden with astrological symbolism. So she is marked by Urania. Also, the other girl from Bromley, Susie Sue, has this distinctive Urania signature. So here is the Bromley connection that I mentioned. Asteroid Urania is directly conjunct her sun. Susie Sue, Gemini, emerged as the queen of post-punk with that alienation, dark mascara, exploding hair, and the stark rejection of female prettiness in her style, which was laden with references to Egyptian goddesses. Another striking point in Farr's chart is that the Sun is conjunct Muse asteroid Polyhymnia. This hits a perfect note of resonance as this is the muse of sacred music. Yes, she presided over the temple named Isis-Urania, and they appeared more significant, but Florence was multifaceted, and this was possibly the most noticeable of her talents, her musical voice, along with the haunting tones of the psaltery. Polyhymnia represents the lyrical pull of the sacred, so that she is relevant does not surprise. Farr used a technique of voice intoning verse in a lyric way, almost like singing, but not quite. Muses themselves do not offer their story in an obvious way, and they rarely trump the personal planets. You can read a character from the basic elements of the chart, the angles, the planets, and the points, yet the asteroids pencil in this extra coloring and detail, especially in a tight orb to the sun or moon, as it is here. Polyhymnia is, along with the personal name asteroid Florence, a marker of her soul's path and of that refined quality of her voice and demeanor that was noted especially by W.B. Yeats and that she was able to cultivate. She seemed in tune with her dharma with this. She had this ability to turn prose and verse into a sacred chant and to raise it up to a higher level, just as she must have done with her Egyptian rites. Yeats was so enamored of this skill that he wanted to collaborate with her to demonstrate the skill in the plays they produced. With Polyhymnia, there is nothing profane in her realm. To be touched by Polyhymnia in any chart raises the vibration to the level of mystical union. And for an artist to have this quality would confer a soulfulness and a heightened awareness of the interconnectivity of life, which she had. She had a theory about words of power being recited for their occult purpose. In her book, The Music of Speech, in 1909, she wrote that of the many ways to utter these words, they were designed to create moods of the soul or to set in motion operative forces, and that the sound of the intoned chant is efficacious. She specifically compared her way of intonation to the reciting of mantras, the repetition of sacred formulas in Hindu practices. Isis was first restored to prominence by Blavatsky and then became the presiding goddess of the Renaissance of interest in a more pagan understanding of the world. She is synonymous with nature herself. The Golden Dawn chose to name themselves after Isis as their presiding divinity, along with Urania. Farr identified with Isis as with many ancient Egyptian deities and studied her all her life. She did much to restore the awareness of this goddess in the West. Farr's asteroid Isis was at 11 degrees of Capricorn. This is in opposition to her sun at 15 degrees of Cancer. So this is a strong enough placement for it to be noticeable and to cause friction. As mentioned, there's a striking conjunction of asteroid Isis with asteroid Urania in the chart of the Temple of Isis-Urania. Along with asteroid Ceres, it was there in the early degrees of Taurus and able to bring these higher energies down to Earth. Whether McGregor mothers knew this or not, or it was just inspired timing is not clear. But it was Moina Mathers rather than Florence who acted this out in full. She actually dressed up for public performances as priestess Anari to invoke Isis to her husband's Ramesses Osiris. These rites were performed in Paris. Moina's asteroid Isis is distinct as it was conjunct Venus in Aries, and many commented that Moina looked very much the part and was believable when she embodied this priestess Anari. Moina's Isis was given this booster of artistic expression from a forceful Venus ruled by Mars. Florence Farr made a momentous decision to go off to Ceylon and did so on September 5th in 1912. She went to teach at the Udiville Ramanathan Girls' College in Jaffna. This was a Tamil girls' school. Jupiter, the representative of long voyages in Sagittarius, and Juno were trying to her natal Jupiter South Node Venus on that day. Perhaps this was following in the footsteps of Alan Bennett, who had lived in Ceylon for a while and who had mastered Sanskrit and Pali for Buddhist scriptures. He was proficient in yoga and meditation and respected by his teachers. Her choice puzzled many, but Farr may have also been thinking about Florence Nightingale, whom her father had known well. Nightingale had gone off to Constantinople in 1854 to minister to soldiers from Crimea. I think this did fulfill her in some ways, as her role was as principal to 800 girls whom she treated with care and concern, so they came to call her mother. This activated both the Leo stellium as teacher archetype and the Cancer sun as mother. Farr had by then become a theosophist. She was invited by another theosophist, Sri Ponnambalam Ramanathan, to visit Ceylon. Ramanathan, an Aries born in 1851, was a Shaivite Tamil who actually had taught Alan Bennett yoga meditation and wrote that the Gospel of St. John can be understood as a set of instructions in yoga. Farr was following her dharma, no doubt, as a Cancer sun sign, but the sun is alone in Cancer and a cluster of planets are in Leo. With this Leo stellium, she was a born teacher, appointed as lady principal, but her duties were mainly administrative. Her south node is in Leo, so this was her default mode, enabling a natural instinctive role as teacher and role model. But with Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, and Saturn all in Leo, the picture is clear. She could amplify and make beautiful the delivery of any content, but it also rested on her beliefs in the rights of young women to be properly educated. Saturn in the first house, though, could give it a stern veneer and be disciplinarian. Her esoteric knowledge encouraged an authenticity to emerge as the proper self-development process, a kind of to thine own self be true philosophy, as stated in her 1907 essay, Our Evil Stars. She was made for the stage and for performing, but revealed in her letters that she had too much personality to be a really good actress, that her energies might be better served through this teaching role. She had in fact organized the education program at the Golden Dawn. They say teachers are natural performers in the classroom anyway, and having all eyes on her was not unusual. She was a major influencer through the stories she told, and most likely in the eyes of her students. With Neptune in the 9th house, too, she would have had a powerfully spiritualized and romantic notion of traveling to other countries and mingled interest in meditation and understanding Vedanta. Some said she went to Ceylon knowing these were her final years and she could escape being seen getting older by the London crowd. It was W.B. Yeats who said that. But she wanted to be, she said, among the wise. With the moon in Pisces and Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces, that last decan ruled by Mars, it suggests going along with end-of-life feelings surrendering or wafting away out of life on the river of reincarnation. She had Mars in the sixth house, which can trigger health problems, allergies, and irritations in daily life. She suffered from breast cancer and underwent a mastectomy. And she even joked to Yeats in a letter about her new relationship with the pattern scar that remained on her chest. The astrolocational map for Florence in Ceylon, or modern-day Sri Lanka, has the Sun MC line running through just to the east, so she found a visibility in her public role there, almost like the sun was setting on her life. In London, it was her Mercury line, with communications networks, contacts being at their height, crossed with a Pluto on the angle, so intense depth research into the occult there. But in Jaffna, she was more isolated, able to be quiet, but able to shine in a relaxed way, probably happy to end her days there. The fact that it was breast cancer is apt, considering that breast milk is nourishment for the child and symbolic of a Cancerian sun sign. She died in the hospital in Colombo on the 29th of April 1917. The transiting south node was conjunct her Sun at 15 degrees of Cancer. Transiting Saturn at 26 of Cancer was closely aligned to transiting Neptune at 2 degrees of Leo, which conjuncted her natal Jupiter south node Venus. But this also triggered the opposition to her natal Mars, a south node in Capricorn Aquarius. And transiting Chiron was conjunct her natal Neptune at the zoned out final earth-quitting degree of Pisces. She was cremated and her ashes were thrown in the Kalyani River. A perfect expression of that Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces. In the waters she was born, and to the waters she returned. Any assessment of Florence Farr has to take into account that she is not well known, not as much as she could be, but that once you do learn about her, appreciation of all she did tends to grow rapidly. She even played Herodias in the revived production of Wilde's Salome in London in 1905. But less known is that she also directed it. She played not just a side role as muse to leading writers of the day, but a pivotal leading role in the Golden Dawn, studying, teaching, channeling the core work that has made them still so influential today. She was an artist who played in the imaginal realms, and the impact of that is not always obvious. Her definition of magic was unlimiting experience, which she demonstrated in her unusual choices. This is what baffled people about her and left them wondering why someone with so many talents did not make more of herself. But she was true to herself, which is an achievement in itself. I looked at her daimon, her lot of spirit, and think that it probably guided her, as it is on the galactic center at 27 degrees of Sagittarius. So she was in tune with something beyond as well that prompted powerful urges to do things differently. Her experiments with voice technique, that Pluto in Taurus in the 10th, Mercury conjunct the ascendant, Sun conjunct Polyhymnia, involved what sounded like half song in monotone interrupted by half tones, was not always understood well and divided people. Yeats loved it, Shaw did not. What it may have boiled down to was that fundamentally she was a mystic wanting to go beyond all traditional beliefs and achievements. So that placed her completely at odds with the world's understanding of success. So thanks for listening, and I hope you found that interesting. Asteroids certainly bring something fresh to the table, but in such a biography, we learn so much about someone who isn't that well known. So do please like and share and get to know more about Florence. This is time to go with the Sun in Cancer right now. I'm doing only limited natal chart readings at the moment, but do still get in touch via email. All the details are there on my website. Hope to hear from you soon. Thanks again.